The latest setback for an Indian drug manufacturer, America's Center for Disease Control and Food and Drug Administration Authority have sounded an alert over an eye drop manufactured by a Chennai-based pharma company which they believe may, and I would stress the use of the word may, have caused the death of 3 individuals. The US FDA have since visited the manufacturer and have been very critical of manufacturing standards. The Tamil Nadu Health Authority and now the Government of India also, the drug regulator at the centre, say the company's manufacturing standards have not been compromised. Now, the drug in question is called Ezricare. That's what it's called in America. It's an over-the-counter eye drop which was sold in America. Tests done by the US regulators indicate the presence of an extremely drug-resistant bacteria in samples of opened bottles of Ezricare. I might again repeat, the bottles were opened, right? And that's important. And we'll come to why. 3 people have been killed and there have been reports of 8 people losing their vision following the possible use of these eye drops. Now, the American Center for Disease Control says Ezricare was the only common artificial tears product identified across 4 healthcare facility clusters, which is why they've raised this alarm. Now, highly drug-resistant bacteria, they say, was found in multiple lots of opened Ezricare bottles recovered from patients with and without eye infections. However, speaking to NDTV, the Tamil Nadu Drugs Control Director investigating Global Pharma, that's the Indian company, have said that there is no contamination in unopened bottles of the eye drop at Global Pharma's Tamil Nadu plant. There have been samples of several batches which have been analyzed. Raw materials used are of an acceptable standard. Now, the Tamil Nadu survey is in stark contrast to a survey of the plant which was done by the US Food and Drug Administration, which has extremely adverse findings on the quality of manufacture of eye drops in question. Now, the FDA, after a site visit, has stated that the company used a manufacturing process that lacked assurance of product sterility. The product may not have been sterile. There are no written procedures regarding aseptic techniques and behavior. So, the process of manufacture and the behavior of personnel in terms of ensuring everything is antiseptic in the environment where it is actually manufactured, question marks on that. No test to identify components used in a drug product. A drug product has many components. The US FDA says perhaps tests were not done to identify each of the components which were used. These are the American allegations. They've given a paper and handed it over to the company saying this is why they have problems. Now, from a larger standpoint, this is now the 3rd time in 6 months that Indian manufacturing drugs have been linked to deaths. In October 2022, the Gambia in Africa blamed India-made cough syrup for the death of 36 children. The World Health Organization was also involved in the process of raising these concerns. In December, just a couple of months back, Uzbekistan claimed that 18 children died after consuming Indian syrup. And now, in April, US authorities flagging possible deaths linked to Indian eye drops. Joining us now, Dr. Amita Gupta, Professor of Medicine and International Health and Director of the Johns Hopkins India Institute, Dr. Gopal Dabade, who is member of the All India Drug Action Network. We've got Prashant Reddy, who's a co-author of The Truth Pill, The Myth of Drug Regulation in India. He's joined me in the past as well. Dr. Rajiv Dasgupta, Professor at the Center for Social Medicine and Community Health at JNU. And we're also joined by Dr. Santosh Honawar, Director of Medical Services at the Center of Sight in Hyderabad. Thank you all very much for being with us. Dr. Gupta, if we look at the allegations, how important is it to differentiate between a drug which is a highly drug-resistant bacteria which is found in an open bottle or an open vial and the possibility of it existing in an unopened bottle or vial? Because that's a key distinction as this story progresses. What's the importance of or the difference between the two?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on your program today. So look, I think that the way we look at this is that this is an ongoing investigation and we don't have all the sort of primary data in front of us. What we do know is that there's, for the first time, this particular strain was identified in the United States of a highly multi-drug resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa bacteria. And that's what tipped off the sort of alert surveillance system to investigate this further, because this was not a prevalent strain previously. And so what we then do is a case control study where you take individuals who have this bacteria and you compare them to people who don't, and you try to find what might be the common source among the cases and what differentiates them from the controls. Mm-hmm. So at least, as you were mentioning, there seems to be these eye drops that are a common product, at least with many of the cases. And as you rightly said, now the process of testing both unopened and open product is underway. So I think I would say we don't know yet what whether this was contaminated at the source, at the factory, along the distribution chain, or if it's something that has some susceptibility after opening. But what is unusual is the fact that we don't usually see this multi-drug resistant Pseudomonas bacteria. So it has to have entered into the eye drops in some shape or form, if that's indeed the most likely cause of this outbreak.
Prashant Reddy, I went through all the documents over here. I've seen what the FDA's site report actually of this plant had to say, and there were 11 observations, all extremely critical. And on the other hand, the Indian drug regulator and the Tamil Nadu drug regulator have said that no, this is fine, their manufacturing standards are absolutely okay. So how do I, as a possible user of this drug or anybody on this program, actually try and get an idea of what's right and what's wrong?
Well, the problem with the Indian government and even the state drug regulators is that their reflexive reaction in all these cases is basically to deny any responsibility. Now, the thing that we need to take note of in this particular incident is that the US FDA has been raising concerns about manufacturing quality in India since 2007, since the Ranbaxy scandal broke open. Now, most of those cases had to do with rather pedantic observations of, you're not following this standard, that standard. They weren't able to conclusively establish harm to American patients. But this case appears to be changing that. If the US FDA's final investigation concludes that this product was responsible for deaths, the American government, the American Congress, I'm pretty sure, will take some strict action. Because if you remember the reaction of the Indian government post the Gambian incident, post the Uzbekistan incident, they have simply denied all responsibility. And in the Gambian incident, 70 children died, not 36. In Uzbekistan, 18 children died. So people are dying. The US FDA has been raising this for 15 years. And nothing is changing in India. The government of India is acting like there's absolutely nothing wrong.
But then, so Prashant, I just have one clarification over there. As I understand it, the drugs haven't been, they've voluntarily withdrawn 2 drugs, right? One is an eye ointment, one is an eye drop. They weren't ordered to do that. Now, if this is the case, then are we not getting ahead of ourselves at potentially saying that this company has been manufacturing killer drugs?
No, I'm not saying that. That has to be established after an investigation. But the US FDA's, the report that you just cited is quite scathing. There clearly appears to have been some quality control failures. But what I'm talking about is the perception globally about the Indian government's attitude towards pharma. We've dug ourselves into this nationalistic hole where any allegation we claim is an anti-India conspiracy, that now we are unwilling to accept responsibility in any case. And there are absolutely no visible changes that we have seen since the Gambian incident.
Dr. Dabade, would you agree with that there are no visible changes? As I understand it, in cases in Haryana where one of the drugs in the previous incident was being manufactured, there was some stringent action which was taken, or certainly in the other case as well, that there was intervention at the local level. Was that significant?
Thanks for inviting for this debate. This is a very important debate. And as regarding the Indian government's response, whatever is possible, I think they are trying to do, or that it appears that they are trying to do. But drug regulation is a very slippery road. And there are many pitfalls, I agree. And the drug regulatory authorities need to be eternally vigilant. There is no shortcut for that. Because one has to understand that the drug companies always use the best brains that are available. And our regulatory authorities have to be much more skilled and much better equipped than the drug companies themselves. So every country needs to have these drug regulatory authorities on their toes. And that is the price for having these drugs. Now, I was telling about the US FDA. Even if you look back, there have been instances where contamination has occurred even in US. For example, I want to tell about this heparin, a drug used in 2008. Yes. And it was manufactured by Baxter International, US company. They have leased it out to the Chinese company, and 81 deaths occurred. Now, this is not the only one. And then, then there is, in 1982, Chicago Tylenol murders. And in, again, 2007, 2000, toothpaste contained diethylene glycol. And the New England Journal mentions 48 people died. Yep. New England compounding. There was methylprednisolone, which is used for epidural injection, was contaminated. And again, in 2018, tetrazole was marketed. No, see, it's no use blaming the drug regulatory authorities. I think we need to bring political pressure and ensure that these drugs are of safe and the consumer can use it safely. Now, if you look at the US FDA, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world, let's agree with that. Because if a drug gets clearance from US FDA, many countries look upon it as, okay, this is a standardized report. But there are a lot of pressures again on US FDA. Let us look at that. Sure. The drug industry has tremendous pressure.
Sure. I get, and thanks very much for raising that point about the pressure on the drug industry and the need to be ahead of them in terms of regulators. You know, Dr. Dasgupta, I want to talk about the larger point over here about highly drug-resistant bacteria, you know, even ICU-borne bacteria, which are absolute killers. Now, the fact that a certain element of this has been found in these vials, and let's take that at face value because they've tested these, they found it, right? And there's a possibility of it spreading. How does the existence of these drug-resistant bacteria, particularly in ICU settings in India, represent a battle which the global community appears to be losing at some stages?
Thank you. Shifting the gaze to, and not the goalpost, to what you pointed at, the larger context is that the WHO has been championing a global patient safety action plan within which both quality of medicines, the regulation of the drug industry, as well as hospital or healthcare acquired infections are part of. And India is very much a part of this global patient safety action plan 2021-30, and India has backed it up with its own national patient safety implementation framework 2018-2025. So it is not that India is not alive to these challenges, these realities, and that the fact that India has a global commitment to patient safety, of which both manufacturing quality as well as healthcare acquired infections are very critical. The point is that establishing causality, and that's where the whole debate is, or the whole the tensions are. I myself, as you are aware, is a member of the National Adverse Events Following Immunization, that committee. Yes. Establishing causality or the quality of the primary investigation is extremely crucial, just like any other investigation, including crime investigations. Now, oftentimes we face challenges in the Indian context because the quality of the primary investigation is not very good, and then when it comes to the state or national levels, we are unable to confirm or reject it either way. But here, the FDA does seem to have undertaken some quality investigations, and therefore, while establishing a direct causality is very difficult, it's not something you can see under the microscope in the laboratory like a lab test you do, and you can directly incriminate a drug or a vaccine. One essentially has to take in the weight of the evidence and make a sense of that evidence and respond accordingly. Thank you.
Dr. Gupta, would you like to sort of come in on the point that I'm trying to raise? Because it's essentially, even in this case, highly drug-resistant bacteria. We have a problem certainly in India. We've now got a certain strain which is there in the United States. This cannot be treated conventionally with existing antibiotics, for example, or other drugs. How does this represent a real threat? Because this is at the heart of this particular issue of alleged contamination.
Yes, well, I think that we have to recognize that the antimicrobial resistance is truly now one of the big threats that impacts health across the globe. And in a place like India, which has a large burden actually of carbapenem resistance, this is a particularly important antibiotic that's used for certain types of infections. And I'll give you just a comparison that 40% or so of infections in ICUs in India have been found to show evidence of carbapenem resistance, where we're sort of at the 2 to 3% in the United States for carbapenem resistance. This specific strain isn't a bacteria that's commonly found in infection, Pseudomonas. But what's unusual about this is when they did some sequencing, they found specific elements of resistance that hadn't been previously identified in the United States, and so we have very, very few antibiotics that available to treat this infection. And we have to think about specific combinations. And this also results from a long-standing lack of investment to develop new agents for drug-resistant infections. It hasn't been previously a priority for pharmaceutical companies to develop new antibiotics because they much prefer to do lifestyle drugs or cancer drugs or other drugs because of the profit margins, et cetera. But I think this is really important for us to pay attention. This is not just a problem in India or the United States or elsewhere. This is a global problem that needs a global solution and needs new drug development and new solutions. But I think this outbreak highlights the few different important things. One is the infection. 2 is the manufacturing process, and 3, we need to ensure that we do a good job of getting the data, quality data, and making actionable effort to improve quality of manufacturing, if indeed that's what's found to be the source of this infection.
Dr. Honawat, I think a lot of our viewers would be asking that, we use eye drops all the time. In a place like Delhi, for example, air pollution is such a factor that, people use eye drops quite frequently to lubricate their eyes. And then you have a report which says that eye drops cause deaths or have caused deaths allegedly in America. So what are people watching this program expected to believe when they're told, just use an eye drop, a simple one?
Well, it's very rare in a general clinical setting, getting contaminated eye drops and getting your eye infected. Going to the extent of removal of the eye and causing death is extremely rare, I would say. But the drop that we are talking about is a preservative-free eye drop. And any preservative-free eye drop has to be used in a particular way, and it has to come in a multi-dispenser vial, which is tip-sealed. That is the way it is distributed. If that particular precaution is not taken in dispensing a drop, or if the drop gets contaminated by the user himself, then it is a concern. Otherwise, most of the drops that are used for general eye care purposes are having preservatives which will prevent contamination of the eye drop over a particular period of time, for 28 days, I would say.
And Dr. Honawat, what I'm trying to understand is, again, just as a layperson, how does an infection spread from one person to another in a particular community, even if there is a particular vial which is contaminated? Is it because, for example, contaminated eye drop may have fallen on linen and that ended up infecting somebody else? How does this infection spread?
It's mainly by cross-infection. If one person is infected and he touches his eye and touches anything else around him, and if somebody else touches the same contaminated area, then he can get that infection in his eye. So it's mainly by cross-infection.
Dr. Gupta, is that the sense in the United States? How, there have been several communities where many people have been infected. As I understand it, some people who've not even had a prior eye infection. So how is this actually spreading?
Yeah, so a lot of these drug-resistant infections can result in what we call can result on things in the environment. So if you're in a nursing home, somebody is using the drops and then all of a sudden touches their eye, touches the railings, touches the sheets. Another healthcare worker comes and is helping to assist that patient. Then they have it on their hands. Technically, they're supposed to be doing hand washing, but we know things don't always happen in the perfect world. They go to the next room and then they have it on their hands and they start to sort of, work with the next patient. So that's one way you can get what we call nosocomial spread. So within the healthcare setting. In other scenarios, you can have this become an issue in the community where people might be in the same household or the like. So a little bit depends on how persistent these drug-resistant bacteria are in the environment, and as well as who all, how transmissible they are, once they're found. And the other issue is that some of them are carried in the stool, and there can be sort of fecal-oral transmission. So a little bit will depend on Pseudomonas, for example, can reside in water and on surfaces, and so can be nosocomial transmitted in healthcare settings. And that's likely what happened in this scenario, that there were some people who used the eye drops, and then subsequently others got secondarily infected. Yeah.
Dr. Dasgupta, one final question to you. How does all of this, Uzbekistan, Gambia, and now America, affect India's reputation as the world's sort of global pharma, as it were?
Yes, it is true that India is a leader both in pharma, medicines as well as vaccine production. Two things in the big picture need to be kept in mind at this point from India's point of view. One, that as the G20 president, India's presidency, and within the G20 health mandate, vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics is a very important focus area. And therefore, India quickly needs to restore confidence in its pharma industry, particularly as India pledges to serve the global south as well as the G20 nations. And secondly, linking back to the antimicrobial resistance issue, as India prepares for its One Health mission, and India is certainly very committed to it, AMR is at the very heart of the One Health approach. And therefore, both within the One Health mission as well as within the G20, and both are linked in some ways, India does have a very big responsibility, and one hopes that as a country and as a government and as the regulators will rise to the occasion.
All right. Look, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. This is an investigation which is still continuing in America, but the allegations are very strong that post the use of this eye drop manufactured by an Indian company, a fairly large Indian company, there have been deaths which have taken place in the United States. But the final conclusion, the last word, has not been written. Now, we have reached out, we have tried to reach out to the company in question, Global Pharma. We've sent them questions as well. They've not responded, and we would very much like to hear from them and believe that they do need to come on record. Now, we are out of time on this program. From all of us here, goodbye.